I used to think if I could just write the perfect letter, find that right combination of words, and if they could see it all in writing, that my family would finally hear me and understand me and know where I was coming from. The dynamics would shift, common sense would prevail, and they would actually support me in my decision to build boundaries around somebody that I believed was dangerous to myself, to my family, and to my children. Spoiler alert, it didn't. It just made things worse. At the time, estrangement was never even a consideration. It was not even on the radar screen of possibilities, and it was certainly not what I wanted. But here I am, an estranged daughter, an estranged daughter-in-law, and I've been an estranged mom. Thankfully, that one is healing. I want to talk a little bit now about why all of that mountain of evidence doesn't even matter when you're dealing with a dysfunctional system, when you're dealing with a broken family system, or when things have reached the point of estrangement. If you're stuck in that gridlock where all you've got left is letters and last-ditch texts, it's a brutal place to be. You're over here pouring out your soul just trying to get them to see your humanity, and all they're doing is using it as ammunition. You're not crazy for writing those letters. You're not stupid for trying. You're not the problem for wanting to be heard. When we're dealing with a massive family breakdown such as this, where the end result is most likely going to be estrangement, our brains start screaming at us that we're not safe. And we try to convince ourselves, if we can just explain our hearts so clearly, the other person will finally get it and this insanity will stop. And it makes total sense because in normal, healthy, functioning relationships, that is exactly how communication works. What I wish I'd known a lot sooner than I did, though, that if it's not working that way, it's not a normal, healthy relationship. No matter how much you try to pretty it up, no matter how much you try to say, oh, yes, it is, it's not. And it's not going to be that without significant effort and intervention. When we're in these highly dysfunctional dynamics, the over-explaining isn't communication. It's actually a beautifully disguised survival strategy. It's an automatic program running in your nervous system where you're trying to negotiate your safety, your humanity, and your value with people who aren't interested in any of that. So when you send these massive text messages or that heartfelt letter and you think you're building a bridge, all you're really doing is handing them a blueprint of exactly where you're vulnerable, and you're showing them exactly where to hit you, and it's almost completely guaranteed to backfire. I know how terrifying it is when it feels like they're not hearing you, when they can't see you, and when you've lost your power and you know there's very real stakes on the line. It just feels like this overwhelming, chaotic, lonely mess. In fact, if you are standing in the middle of that right now, I have put together a free guide called Making Sense of the Mess to help you start sorting through some of that noise and figure out what to do with all the pieces. I'll tell you where to get that in just a minute. But before you write one more sentence or edit another text draft, you need to understand the invisible mechanics of what's going on. The first thing I want you to understand is that no matter how much you present, your evidence doesn't matter. And the reason it doesn't is because you're playing in a rigged courtroom. If you look closely at what's really going on, it's litigation. And what should be a respectful exchange of ideas and feelings where we're all seen and heard, the family dynamic has become like a courtroom. And you're thinking, if I just gather enough evidence, if I can just make them see it, Certainly the judge is going to see the truth and rule in my favor. I know that because I did this for way too long. And I sent way too many letters, and I believed it was the only way I could ever be heard because nothing else was working. I wanted to be clear. I wanted to build an ironclad case so they couldn't misunderstand. What I didn't know was that it didn't matter what I said or how I said it. They heard me. They already knew where I was coming from, and they'd already decided that I wasn't going to be right. They were going to misunderstand me, and they weren't going to budge. When we're locked into this kind of a dysfunctional dynamic, the facts don't matter and they don't function the way that they do in the real world. Your explanations aren't seen as an invitation to connect or to heal. They're actually treated as a threat to the narrative. Because if they acknowledge what you're trying to say, if they look at your needs, your reasons, your truth, then it means they might be wrong. And that is certainly not acceptable because the system is designed to prevent that at all costs. So, what actually happens when you do send those beautifully drafted letters? All they really do is pick out one little adjective, find a way to twist it, and they will use it as ammunition forevermore to prove that you indeed are the difficult one and that you are the problem, whether it's true or not. That brings us to the next hard truth, and this one might sting a little bit. We have to look at why you feel that intense, frantic, almost physical urge to keep explaining your side, to keep trying, even when they've proven they're not listening. This is what we call family estrangement gridlock. Because these are attachment-based relationships, because these are core relationships, that doesn't just feel like that person's a whack job. They start to feel like a threat to our survival. And our nervous system interprets being misunderstood, especially in these kinds of relationships, as an immediate existential threat to our survival. And in my case, there may also be real safety issues that carry real consequences that are outside of the family, and all of it was being ignored. And I couldn't for the life of me understand why. I assumed they loved me. I assumed they cared about me. I assumed they were reasonable people. And I had no idea that all of that, even if it was true on some level, had been so warped and so twisted because the end goal of the dysfunctional system was to protect the image, not safety. And the minute I started over explaining or writing all those paragraphs to justify why this was necessary, I truly had accidentally entered into a negotiation. And what I was really saying was, here I am. I'm right here. This is my perspective. This is my family. These are our needs. Now, please vote on whether that reality is allowed to exist or not. I've got a newsflash for you. If you are in that kind of a similar situation, the answer has already been decided, and it is no. All we're really doing is bargaining for our sanity and our worth with people who've decided to profit from our confusion and our invisibility. They don't want clarity. They don't want compliance. And when you give them that 5-page letter, all you're really doing is giving them a menu of things to argue about. The third truth I want to share with you is probably one of the most frustrating, freeing, heartbreaking, and empowering truths you will ever hear in your life. In order to reclaim your peace, you have to let them have their narrative, and you have to be completely okay with being the villain in their story. In order to get there, we have to look at why we keep sending that evidence. In my case, I was terrified of the consequences. I was terrified of losing them. I was terrified of losing my kids. And somewhere deep in there, there's a sense that if you stop arguing for this, if you stop defending yourself, you're telling them it's okay and you're admitting guilt. But when you're dealing with this kind of a deeply, profoundly dysfunctional dynamic, you have to accept that they need you to be the bad guy. They can't function without you being the bad guy. And if you aren't the problem, then they have to face all of their own unhealed truth, all of the misguided things that they've said. And the system is just not wired to do that. And in fact, it will short circuit if you try to force it. They're already dedicated to misunderstanding you, to misrepresenting you, to spinning whatever stories they're going to tell, because your villain arc keeps their story alive. And no amount of perfectly formatted emails and no tear-stained text messages are going to change the narrative that they are relying on for their own emotional survival. I knew it was over when I realized that they were never going to change. They were going to keep defending a creep. They were going to keep being right. They were going to keep making me the bad guy for talking about the problem. And I realized that I didn't have to stick around to hear it, and neither did my kids. I had recognized that the courtroom I was in was completely corrupt, and all I could do was walk out of the building, not in anger, not in frustration. No, there's been plenty of that. But it was simply because I was done. I stopped sending the letters, not because I didn't have anything left to say, but because I finally realized that my voice and my truth was too powerful to keep screaming into the void. Ultimately, I realized that I was pouring all of my energy into trying to change their mind, but I hadn't actually changed mine yet. It was in that moment that I realized I didn't need permission to be right. They knew I was. I knew I was. A lot of other people knew I was, including the people that had the power to make a mess of my life. But the family system just couldn't stand the consequences of being wrong. And they made sure they weren't. And they were willing to lose me and my family over it. Because I know how overwhelming it is when everything collapses and you're standing there in the middle of the wreckage, looking at all of the rubble that once was your life, wondering what to do, where to start, and how to sort out this mess. I put together a free guide called Making Sense of the Mess. It's a simple, free guide designed to help you figure out how to sort through the noise, the confusing emotions, all the things that need to be done, and all the fragments of what used to be, so that your nervous system can finally start to settle down and you can start to breathe again. You can find a link to it down in the description below, or if you want to comment first aid, I'll tell you where you can find it. If you like what you hear and you want to go deeper into untangling all this kind of mess and the generational patterns and rebuilding your life after everything fell apart, that's exactly the work I do with women every single day. When you're ready, reach out and let me know. But for today, just grab that free guide and give yourself permission to get off the hook. Give yourself permission to let this situation be what it is, to be messy for a little while without you jumping in to try and fix it or to try and save anybody or, heaven forbid, writing another letter. I promise they already heard you. They already know where you stand. Now your job is to look at all the evidence that's being presented back to you, even if you don't want to see it, and just let it be what it is. If you've still got some big feelings swirling around over all of this, or you're like me and have been trained to always be the bigger person or to take the high road, check out this video right up here to learn the real cost of doing that. I'll meet you over there.